Dave is MMRA's attorney and legislative lobbyist. He's with the firm of Faegre, Drinker, Biddle, and Reith, and that's a mouthful. Dave has been our eyes and ears at the state capitol and the PERA board member since 2009. He's a former member of the Minnesota State Senate, and he knows his way around the state capitol. When it comes to the Minnesota State Legislature, Dave is the guy you want on your side. He doesn't quit, and we found out that he hates to lose. Dave fought successfully to save our pension in 2009 and 10. He led the fight to increase our COLA, and now he is monitoring the Pension Commission's reaction to last year's legislation to study the COLAs of all public pensions. Dave's clients include household names such as Target, Delta, and the Vikings. It's a real pleasure to work with Dave. He will now take you behind the scenes at the state legislature, review last year's activities, and preview next year's possibilities and more. Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Leonard, for the kind introduction. And again, it's good to be with everybody today, even though it's under different circumstances than normal. Certainly look forward, hopefully next year, to getting back to the more personal interaction. What I thought I'd do is give a brief legislative update from last session. Fortunately, Senator Dietzich and Doug have done a little bit of that work for me, but I'll give a brief overview of session, what's coming up, talk a little bit about the COLA study, and what I see coming next session. So when the legislature convened last session, it was early February. They had a $1.5 billion surplus, and nobody had really been paying attention to COVID. By the end of the regular session, which was in May, the world had kind of changed. Like everybody else's world, there were significant budgetary and other impacts that policymakers had to deal with resulting from coronavirus. The legislature shut down for a month, so quote unquote non-essential legislation became that much harder to move. We did not have access to the Capitol from March through the end of session, and the lobbying community and the public still do not have access to the legislature. There were a lot of issues that were being dealt with that were put on hold. But from a budgetary perspective, the latest estimates suggest that there will be a $4 billion deficit from COVID that the legislature will have to deal with next year, which is the budget setting year for the legislature. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it was certainly a lot of outside activity during that 4-month stretch earlier in the year. It really changed the agenda and the priorities of the legislature. The big issue that we worked on last year during session was the Social Security issue that Senator Dietzich mentioned. Senate Republicans, a big part of their tax proposal was to eliminate taxes on all Social Security benefits. With respect to the House, we have the only divided legislature in the country. So the Senate is controlled by Republicans and the House is controlled by Democrats. And they had different views on Social Security. While Senate Republicans wanted to eliminate the tax on all benefits, House Democrats feel like, there's a progressive tax policy in this state, and that, taxes for lower income folks, regardless of where the income comes from, is much lower, and they were concerned that kind of proposal would more benefit higher income Minnesotans. And so our position was to kind of basically say this: if you're going to do it, you need to recognize the position of many public employees and other employees who made higher contribution rates because they didn't get Social Security, weren't eligible to participate in Social Security, and otherwise there's an inequity there. And so that was a lot of our effort in the Senate. As I had mentioned earlier, we worked with some other groups that we were able to identify: police and fire, retired railroad employees, and others who were in a similar situation, to say, you know, you make the big decision on Social Security benefits and whether they should remain taxable. Minnesota is one of a select number of states, I think it's 11, that taxes Social Security benefits. But if you're going to make the change to make them not taxable, then you need to recognize folks like the folks on this meeting and others who've made higher contribution to a public pension plan or another plan and weren't eligible to participate. Now, when the budgetary impacts of COVID hit, that proposal was really put on the sideline. You know, and whether it comes back next session will depend on the elections, as well as the budgetary impacts of COVID and how quickly the country and the state is able to get that behind us. You know, I think the longer that we struggle to move COVID behind us, the greater the budgetary impacts to the state, and the harder it will be for the legislature to look at that kind of a proposal, because there is a fiscal impact to that proposal. And, you know, there's a bigger fiscal impact to the overall proposal. So that's what we spent a lot of our time on. There wasn't as much activity, as Doug said, in the Pension Commission. I think the biggest issue, you know, as he said, was the COLA study. And with respect to that, or I'll talk about that in a second, but I'll talk a little bit about the elections. You know, as I mentioned, we have the only divided legislature in the country. The Senate has a 2-vote majority, and every member of the House and the Senate are on the ballot. So we have a Democratic governor. He's not up for election this year, but every member of the legislature is. And depending on how those elections turn out is really going to depend, you know, is going to dictate how folks decide to deal with a budget deficit, the continued impacts of coronavirus. So, you know, if the Democratic Senate were to flip, or the Senate were to flip and be Democratic, I think you heard from Senator Dietzich, they would be looking less at cutting, you know, programs and opportunities for lower income Minnesotans, and be looking at revenue enhancements or tax increases to deal with it. I think, you know, and I think that's very likely if the House and Senate are both Democratic with a Democratic governor. I think that if it's a different way, and the House stays Republican, or the Senate stays Republican, excuse me, I think there'll be a different approach. And I think that'll be a very contentious discussion between House Democrats. I think most people believe, and of course you never know in this unstable political environment, but folks at the Capitol kind of think it'd be very difficult for the House to flip. I think even House Republicans have conceded that they need President Trump to stay within 3 points of Vice President Biden in the presidential race to have a shot at taking the House. You know, recent polls aren't reflecting that, but polls don't vote. So most of the, you know, interest, most of the focus has been on the Senate because of how people are going to deal with that. You know, how are they going to deal with coronavirus? How are they going to deal with the budget deficit? And I think that'll have a lot, you know, a lot of implications for not only those issues, but who's on the Pension Commission. So, you know, we got to wait to see what happens on that, you know, and next year they will be looking at COLA mechanisms and presenting a study to the Pension Commission to consider, you know. And so we will, you know, there's a call here in a couple of weeks with the Pension Commission. We will be submitting input about the COLA, you know, and how we feel it's working for us. And we will also be relaying that information to members of the commission itself and talking to them about it, about the things that we think are strengths with the COLA, some of our concerns about, its ability to keep up with the cost of living, and be part of the discussion. It's a very big discussion, and we will be a not very big part of it, because there's going to be a lot of focus on the other funds who have COLA mechanisms that don't try to factor in inflation like the para one does. So we're looking forward to that discussion and being involved in that. As folks know from reading a newspaper or our newsletters and others, pension sufficiency is a big issue for us, especially because we don't get Social Security and don't get those higher COLAs. So a lot will be happening between now and the end of the year, and a lot will be moving on in the next session. And the last thing I would say is, it'll be interesting to see how business, progresses next session. I think when people shut the legislature down for, 20, 30 days, and then people couldn't come back, you really had a situation where I think folks thought it was just going to be that session. But given where we're at in dealing with coronavirus and talking to legislative leadership in all parties, it's pretty clear that coronavirus is going to impact how business is done next session too. Because it's not clear that everybody's going to be comfortable bringing the public back, bringing, the lobbying community back. Currently, even staff people at the legislature are working from home still. So bringing them back, bringing back the people in legislative councils and all the people that do the work, they are all, most of them are working from home. And so as you get into January and February and the legislature reconvenes, they're going to have to address that again. And it was one thing to do it in the second year of the biennium. Minnesota has a 2-year biennial budget or cycle. And the second year really is the bonding bill and any cleanup. Well, they still haven't gotten the bonding bill done, and it's now October. To try and set in which the first year of the biennium deals with setting the state's budget and dealing with a massive deficit, most likely. And so that is a lot more work. You're going to see the technological limitations of what can be done over, Zoom like this, or the technological capabilities of the legislature currently are going to come into play. So the logistics, the basic nuts and bolts of moving legislation will be impacted. So it will be an interesting year with a lot of activity. So maybe with that, I'm happy to stop.